Boone Carter had always lived in poverty on a small, half-broken ranch at the edge of the frontier, surviving on whatever little he could earn from tending a few cattle and fixing neighbors' fences. But the night he heard the storm howling through the valley changed his life forever. While most men would have stayed inside, Boone grabbed his lantern and stepped into the rain when he heard terrified screams rising from the swollen river. Rushing toward the sound, he found two native children being torn apart by the violent current, clinging to a broken tree branch that looked ready to snap at any moment. Without thinking of his own life, Boone threw himself into the freezing water, letting the river drag him down before he fought his way toward them. Grabbing both kids and pushing against the current with everything he had left, gasping for breath while the children shivered beside him, he carried them to his cabin, wrapped them in his only good blanket, and stayed awake all night, tending to their fevers, trying to talk to them even though they didn't understand most of his words. By dawn, he hoped the worst was over until he noticed the girl drawing a strange symbol in the dirt again and again, her tiny hands shaking, while the boy kept staring at the horizon with eyes full of dread, as if he expected the world itself to come riding down upon them. Moments later, the ground began to tremble under Boone's feet, followed by a distant thunder that grew louder and heavier with every passing second. When he stepped onto his porch, he froze in disbelief as more than 100 mounted warriors emerged from the rising sun, their silhouettes stretching across the plain like a moving wall of judgment. They rode fast, forming a wide circle around the ranch, their spears upright, their faces painted for war, their eyes cold and unreadable. At the front of the formation rode a tall, fierce-looking man wearing eagle feathers braided through his hair and carrying a spear carved with symbols older than any settlement in the territory. The two children rushed forward the moment they saw him, but the way he dismounted, slow, controlled, his expression dark and wounded, told Boone that he was not here to thank anyone. He walked straight toward the poor rancher, his warriors tightening the circle until Boone felt trapped like an animal. And for the first time he realized that saving those children might have placed him in deadly danger. With only honesty to protect him, Boone lifted his hands slightly in a gesture of peace, praying they understood he had risked his life to save theirs, because one wrong word, one wrong movement, and 100 warriors were ready to decide his fate before the sun fully rose. Boone Carter stood frozen as the warriors tightened their circle around his broken little ranch, their painted faces unreadable in the glowing orange dawn. And although every instinct in his body screamed for him to run or hide, he forced himself to remain still, while the tall warrior chief, clearly the father of the children, walked toward him like a storm about to break. The children rushed to the chief and clung to him, but instead of being relieved, his eyes darkened as he saw the cuts on their arms and the torn leather pouch hanging around the girl's neck, something clearly sacred. The chief's deep voice echoed through the silence as he spoke in a language Boone couldn't fully understand, but the meaning was painfully obvious. He believed the rancher had harmed or kidnapped his children. Boone shook his head and tried to explain, pointing toward the river and mimicking the way he had dragged them from the water. But several warriors instantly raised their spears, interpreting his movement. Panic twisted inside him. He had saved these kids, risked his life, given them shelter and, Yet now he stood one word away from being killed because no one in this SL had ever been more powerless than a poor rancher caught in the misunderstanding of a mighty tribe. The girl suddenly pushed forward, tugging her father's arm urgently and pointing to the symbol she had drawn in the dirt earlier. She knelt and rewrote it quickly, hands trembling, and the chief's expression shifted the moment he saw it. The boy lifted the small leather pouch and held it toward his father, opening it enough for him to peek inside. And whatever was in that pouch carried immense meaning, because all 100 warriors murmured at once, as if recognizing something sacred had been disturbed. The chief closed his eyes, steadying his breath, then turned sharply toward Boone with a stare that was no longer pure anger, but something heavier: confusion, grief, maybe fear. He barked an order, and 2 warriors rode forward, dismounted, and seized Boone by the arms, though they did not hurt him. They merely held him as if he were a witness to something, not yet an enemy. The chief pointed toward the forest where the storm had shattered trees the night before and gestured for everyone to move, the children pulling anxiously at Boone's sleeve as if urging him to come with them. And though he didn't understand why, he felt in his gut that the truth of everything: why the kids were in the river, what the pouch meant, why the warriors looked so haunted, waited somewhere in the shadows of that storm-broken wilderness. As the chief mounted his horse and signaled the march, Boone realized he was being dragged into a story far bigger than saving 2 children, a story that might reveal not only danger but a secret powerful enough to send 100 warriors riding at dawn. As the first light of dawn painted the horizon with gold and amber, Boone Carter followed cautiously behind the chief and his children, the tension in the air so thick it felt like walking through fog, while the warriors spread across the broken plains, scanning every rock, bush, and shadow as if expecting the storm itself to have left a hidden enemy. The girl clung tightly to her father's side, the small leather pouch pressing against her chest, while the boy mirrored her, eyes wide and flickering between Boone and the path ahead, seeming to understand dangers Boone could not yet see. The chief rode silently, every motion deliberate, his gaze fixed on the river bend where the children had almost drowned. And Boone noticed how the warriors' horses moved in perfect synchronicity, dust clouds swirling like ghosts behind them, giving the impression of a living wall of vigilance. Suddenly, the chief stopped, raising a hand, and the children ran forward to a narrow clearing where the river curved violently around jagged rocks, the very spot where Boone had pulled them from the water hours before. The girl dropped to her knees, tracing symbols in the dirt again, pointing at each mark with urgency, while the boy tugged at Boone's sleeve, repeating gestures he had made earlier, eyes wide, indicating that someone had been watching them, someone dangerous. Boone felt a cold realization crawl up his spine. The rescue was only the beginning, and the children had been led into a trap with a plan so precise it could only have been designed by someone who understood both the land and the tribal customs. The chief bent down, examining the leather pouch and the contents within, his expression unreadable, then whispered words to his children, which they repeated to Boone in broken English, explaining that sacred artifacts had been disturbed and someone had tried to frame him for desecration, setting the stage for a violent confrontation. Boone, heart pounding, watched as the warriors fanned out into the hills, eyes searching for tracks, while he tried to keep pace. realizing that his small acts of courage had pulled him into a far larger conflict, one that combined greed, betrayal, and the protection of a culture he barely understood. And as he stood there, following the children through the mist and broken terrain, he understood the fragile balance of trust and danger that hung over them all, knowing that a single misstep could undo everything, yet also recognizing that his decision to act selflessly had placed him in a pivotal position, where he might help right a wrong centuries in the making. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the riverbank as Boone Carter followed the chief and the children through the broken plains, tension tightening his chest with every step, knowing that the slightest mistake could turn the 100 warriors surrounding him from guardians to executioners. The children led the way, their small hands pointing at subtle marks in the dirt and broken branches, retracing the path of someone who had manipulated them into uncovering sacred objects. And Boone realized that their earlier rescue had only placed him in the middle of a carefully planned trap, designed to punish him for an act he had no choice but to perform. The chief rode silently ahead, his eyes scanning the distant hills, occasionally glancing at Boone to measure his intent, while the warriors' horses shifted uneasily, nostrils flaring, their riders whispering commands that made it clear they were ready to act instantly on a signal. The girl clutched the leather pouch close, and the boy mimicked her, his young eyes reflecting a knowledge that chilled Boone, knowledge no child should have, of danger and deceit and the precise timing of a trap. As they reached a narrow clearing along the river, the chief dismounted, bending to examine the pouch and the carved bones within, his expression unreadable. And the children recounted in broken English what they had been told by a man who had sought to manipulate them, claiming the artifacts would bring honor and reward if delivered to Boone. Realization hit Boone like a physical blow. Someone had used innocence and trust to commit theft, desecrate sacred ground, and set him up for retribution. And now he stood in the middle of 100 warriors, with the truth balanced delicately between life and death. The chief rose slowly, his gaze piercing, and spoke to his people with authority that made every rider pause and listen, then signaled for scouts to move toward the hills where they had suspected a hidden observer had guided the children. And Boone followed, heart hammering, realizing that his role had shifted from rescuer to crucial witness, protector, and mediator in a conflict he barely understood. Each step along the riverbank revealed signs of the manipulators, passage-broken branches, scuffed dirt, faint hoofprints, and with every discovery, Boone understood the depth of the deception and the courage it had taken to keep the children safe until now. By the time they returned to the clearing, the chief had gathered his people, and Boone felt a cautious respect grow between him and the warriors. He knew that what he had done was seen not as a crime but as an act of bravery, and for the first time since the storm, he sensed a fragile thread of trust forming, one that might protect him from the consequences of the trap, while also giving him a chance to help restore what had been stolen and desecrated. By mid-morning, the tension that had gripped the riverbank since the storm began to ease, as Boone Carter watched the chief gather his warriors and the children around him, the leather pouch clutched tightly in the girl's hands. Now a symbol of both danger narrowly avoided. The chief's eyes, once dark with suspicion, softened as he spoke quietly to his children, their small voices translating the message for Boone, confirming that the manipulator had been discovered, that the sacred artifacts were secure, and that Boone's actions had preserved not only the children's lives but the honor of their family and the traditions of their people. Boone felt a weight lift from his shoulders as the chief gestured for him to approach, the children rushing ahead to smile up at him with relief and gratitude. And in that moment he realized that his lonely years on the ranch had prepared him for this singular act of courage, the kind that could bridge cultures, heal old wounds, and prevent injustice from consuming both innocent and guilty alike. The chief spoke to his warriors, giving orders that were precise but measured, instructing them to return to their village with the children while leaving Boone unharmed, a clear acknowledgement that he was not an enemy but a witness, a protector, and, in some unspoken way, a friend. As they walked back toward the cabin together, the girl and boy chattered about the river, the storm, and the symbols in the dirt, their excitement tempered by the lessons learned about danger, trust, and courage, while Boone smiled and nodded, realizing that the lessons had traveled both ways, that he had learned as much from these children and their people as they had from him. By the river, the chief handed Boone the pouch and its contents for safekeeping, a gesture of respect and gratitude that made the rancher's heart swell. The children splashed in the shallow water, laughter echoing across the valley, their presence a living reminder of the lives that had been saved and the bonds that had been formed in the aftermath of chaos. Boone looked around at the restored riverbank, the mist rising over Devil's Bend, the warriors mounting their horses for the journey home, and he understood that sometimes courage was more than risking life in a single heroic act. It was also the patience to face fear, the wisdom to act honestly, and the humility to accept trust when offered. The chief paused, placing a hand on Boone's shoulder, and with a nod of approval that carried authority and warmth, made clear that the rancher was now part of their story, a bridge between worlds, and that the river, the children, the storm, and the 100 warriors had all conspired to bring about an unexpected but profound union of lives and cultures. For the first time in years, Boone felt a deep sense of belonging, knowing that he had not only saved lives but had helped protect a heritage, honor a family, and ensure that the wrongs of manipulation, greed, and deceit would not go unchallenged. As the sun climbed higher, warming the river and the plains, Boone Carter, once a poor and lonely rancher, realized that sometimes the storm brought more than danger. It brought purpose, family, and the courage to stand for what is right. And in that quiet dawn, with the children laughing and the warriors riding home, the frontier felt wide enough to hold justice, mercy, and hope all at once.